Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Lauren Bryant, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks for the Franklin Park Action Plan project. As people are arriving, we want to take this opportunity to share a quick reminder for using Zoom. You'll notice that at the bottom of the screen, there's a button labeled chat. If you click this, you'll be able to send a chat to the project team. The people who have the blue Franklin Park backgrounds like I have behind me are all on the project team, and both from the City of Boston and also the design team. We also will be using the toolbar later when we go into our small discussion groups. Also want to make sure that you guys see at the bottom of the screen, there's also a place to turn your video on and off. So please feel free to use that feature. But also do want to say that during the group discussions later, it is nice to be able to see people when we're talking if you're comfortable turning that on. If you experience any Zoom related issues, please send a chat to Christine Brandeo with the City of Boston. For anyone who's calling in, you don't have the ability to use the chat box. So for callers, please use *9 to raise your hand to ask a question. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please take note of them and share them during the breakout room sessions. For those of you on the phone, you can also text questions to 617-590-2383. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on the project website, franklinparkactionplan.com, by the end of the week. Lastly, before we get into the meeting content, please note that interpretation was not requested for this meeting. So this meeting will be in English. However, for future City of Boston meetings, please know that we're eager to hear all voices and are able to offer translation and interpretation upon request. So please reach out to me for Franklin Park stuff or whoever is hosting that meeting that you're interested in for that access to translation and interpretation. I'm going to put my email address, lauren.bryant@boston.gov, as well as the project website in the chat for anyone who's interested in that. I also would like to introduce Chief White Hammond, the Chief of Environment and Open Space for the City of Boston, who would like to say a few words.
I will leave it. I will be short. As you can, for those of you who know my voice, you know that it doesn't usually sound like this. Nah, I'm a bit under the weather, but I'm just wanting to thank folks for being here, for your investment. For those of you who know, I've grown up using Franklin Park my whole life. I know it is a gem. It is quite frankly the envy of people in other parts of the country that we have such an amazing park, an Olmsted Design Park. And so really thankful for folks' engagement to this point. Hope that you'll lean in and share your perspective with us this evening. And we're hoping to move forward to really put this together as a master plan that we can be proud of. And then we can dig in to really beginning the different elements within. So just wanted to thank folks for your engagement to this point and for showing up this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We also are joined tonight by Commissioner Woods from the Parks Department. Commissioner, do you want to say a few words as well?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being involved and engaged in this process. For the past 2.5 years, we've been working with the community to understand how the city can do a better job stewarding our premier park in Boston, which is Franklin Park, all 520 acres of it. It's the largest park by far, and it accounts for almost 25% of all of our city-owned parkland and about half of the Emerald Necklace. It's a beloved part of many people's daily routines, as well as a host of treasured community events. As you may remember, a few years ago, from the sale of the city's Winthrop Square Garage, the allocation of $28 million for Franklin Park sparked this Franklin Park Action Plan process and provided us funding for permanent maintenance and programming endowment for the park, as well as funding to help realize plan recommendations. So although $28 million may seem like a lot of money, it's surely not enough to fund all the work that the park needs. So we need to be thoughtful and strategic in how we leverage these funds to maximize their impact and make the most of this opportunity. We also need to be investing in park operations to sustain the improvements we make. It's so important. We do a great job at capital construction and building these parks, but also the key is to maintain them once they're built. The Franklin Park Action Plan has been a process of building community connections, which have informed a set of recommendations that'll help us all envision how our aspirations for Franklin Park can be realized. We've heard from many of you about ways in which Franklin Park is treasured for what it already is. And it's our job to protect and restore the elements in the park that are in need of renewed stewardship. But we've also heard from many of you about ways in which Franklin Park is underperforming, falling short of what it can be as a resource to the community, if only for the infrastructure in the park better supported the kinds of uses and activities people seek to do here. So our hope is that this plan will guide our work for years to come. It's not just about adding facilities, but also celebrating what we have, developing processes to care for the landscape and park features, and making people feel welcome, exploring and enjoying our park. We view the action plan process as a foundation on which we build future design work, all of which will have us reconnecting with neighbors and park users to consider projects in greater detail. Everything that the community has contributed to this plan is being synthesized by the design team and will be folded into the final plan document, which we hope will be released for public comment late summer or early fall. So tonight's meetings and discussions will help us understand what the community wants to see happen first. Again, thank you for investing with us in this effort, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we're really glad to see everybody here with us tonight. Thank you for taking the time to join us. You may have learned about this event by receiving a postcard or seeing a sign in the park, or maybe through some of our project partners like the Franklin Park Coalition and the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, or maybe by staying in touch on our website, social media, or our emails. For those of you who are on the phone or want to review the presentation afterwards, the presentation and a video of this meeting will be available for download on the website in the next couple of days. Or you can request a printed copy of the presentation by emailing me. We will share a summary of what we've learned tonight and at our meeting that we had earlier today tonight at the website as well. So we're going to add both, again, the franklinparkactionplan.com website and my email address in the chat for those who need them. So we're going to start with a quick overview of the agenda for tonight. So Liza Meyer and I will be providing a quick recap of the meeting that Boston Parks held on April 28th, which was our catch-up meeting, to provide some important context for the purpose of the workshop today and tonight. Then the design team will walk you through a short presentation to remind everyone of the high-level recommendations included as part of the action plan that are being considered for implementation. The presentation will be followed by some breakout rooms that we'll be able to talk about specific parts of the park. And we know that there'll be questions about project costs and timelines and phasing, and we'll share some of that high-level information and examples throughout the presentation. But because we do have a short amount of time together today, we really do want to focus the breakout room discussions on understanding your priorities so that when we all leave here tonight, we have a clear understanding of what's most important to the community as we move forward. At the end, we'll come back together and discuss next steps and how to stay involved in the process going forward. We also want to remind everyone that while we're thinking holistically about the park through all of the action plan recommendations, that we have to be mindful that there are particular areas that are outside of the action plan scope, which are shown in gray. Just because these areas are technically outside of the project scope doesn't mean we aren't carefully thinking about how access in these adjacencies are addressed. Gray areas that are also striped with pink are locations that the action plan will provide recommendations for edge conditions. Then there are also areas in light pink that will require further coordination with park and city stakeholders in order to implement the recommendations for those areas. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Liza to give you some more of our recap.
Great, thanks, Lauren. I'm Liza Meyer. I'm Chief Landscape Architect with Boston Parks, and I'm happy to be here tonight, and thank you all for attending. So back on April 28th, so just a few weeks ago, we kicked off this phase of the action plan with a catch-up meeting that was led by city staff, and the design team was there as well. We had a good turnout, but for those who may not have been able to attend that meeting, I'll provide a brief recap of some of the key information. The recording of the meeting and the presentation slides are also available on the Action Plan project website. We looked back at the project process and schedule, which is what's shown here, including the team's next steps in the remaining phase of work. Today and tonight are our final community workshops for the action plan, but I want to emphasize that this is not your last chance to be involved in the process overall. After gathering additional input in this meeting, the design team will finalize the action plan this summer, as the commissioner mentioned. The plan will be publicly released at the end of summer or early fall with a public comment period to follow. Any comments collected during that time will serve as important input in the next steps of the project as we move into implementation. So also remember that there will be future engagement processes associated with the detailed design of implementation projects as we move forward. Another thing we did on the 28th was to walk through a design process that we might anticipate for any of these projects that are recommended in the action plan. So try to do that quickly here. The typical process involves determining a project scope based on plan recommendations and then working with the city's budget office to determine a funding strategy. And then from there, we hire a designer who will work to develop the design with more detailed studies, including deeper analysis of grading, utilities, ecology, maintenance, historical significance, all the things that need to be incorporated into the design work. And this phase will also include community input and collaboration with park stakeholders and other city departments. Almost all the work we do at Franklin Park will require Boston Landmarks Commission review, and in some cases, Conservation Commission review and approval as well. And as we move through a design process, it's not uncommon to need to revisit the initial project scope, budget, or funding sources so that we get to a point where we're ready to bid, construct, and maintain the project itself. A couple of things to talk about in terms of funding, sort of the overall picture, and then also how we use funding for both capital projects and maintenance. So I'm going to walk through all of those quickly. So obviously funding is a key factor that facilitates moving from an idea to reality. And as you know, the city has already committed $28 million to the improvements at Franklin Park from the sale of the Winthrop Square Garage. And of that, $5 million has gone into an endowment fund for ongoing maintenance and park activation. The remaining $23 million is to be used towards park improvements. But on top of that, we'll also be seeking funding through our annual capital budget, which we did this year. And right now we have a couple of projects that are a part of the mayor's recommended FY23 budget. What the Winthrop Square funds afford is the opportunity to jumpstart projects that wouldn't typically fall within our cyclical park renovation work. So that funding can allow us to invest in spaces that need more than just an upgrade or rehab. And it's important to note that the sum total of all the costs of the potential projects coming out of the action plan will be, far above the 23 million. It may be 175 to 200 million. But we need to remember that the action plan is intended to be a visioning document with a 25 to 30-year time horizon. So we'll be approaching this work incrementally and things will morph as we go. But what we're interested in understanding today are your key priorities so that as we work with our partners to determine next steps on implementation, we focus on the right things first. So let's go next slide. I'm going to talk really quickly about capital funding for park improvements and operations funding for maintenance. This is something that I think we've touched on along the way, but we often receive questions about. So Winthrop Square funds are one of several different funding types we have for various action plan recommendations. Most park work throughout the city is funded by capital dollars, which will be an additional resource for us here. And then occasionally park projects are supplemented by state grants or other outside funds like development mitigation or private donations, all of which provide opportunities to further expand what we can do. So we'll be looking for those opportunities as we move forward, and we'll be trying to figure out what the right fit is for each project so that we can really stretch the Winthrop Square money and leverage additional funds as appropriate. And then if we go to the next slide and we talk about maintenance, we know that park improvements and there we go. Great. Thank you. Park improvements and maintenance work go hand in hand. And we're aware that maintenance of Franklin Park is of major importance to the community. This has been something we've talked about throughout the process. So the action plan will include maintenance recommendations. How do we maintain the park at a higher level today? And how do we maintain the kinds of recommendations that are included in the plan? So maintenance funding comes from a few different sources. Most of it is through the city's annual operating budget, and that includes costs related to staffing, materials, and equipment. The $5 million from the Winthrop Square funding that went into the endowment fund now forms the Franklin Park Trust, which provides additional annual maintenance and operating funds to the park. And then maintenance work is also supplemented by volunteer hours wherever possible. And then lastly, the city's launching a new Power Core program that'll be a meaningful addition that we'll touch on again in a minute. As we move forward, we'll continue to collaborate with the Franklin Park Coalition and the Emerald Necklace Conservancy to stay informed about the community's maintenance priorities. I'm going to pass it back to Lauren to keep going through this content. Thanks.
Thanks, Liza. So we're excited to share that there are several items that are already in motion through the various funding sources that are available to us, which, like Liza said, includes the mayor's proposed FY23 budget. And these items in motion fall within a few categories. There are park improvements, specific early improvements for the Bear Dens and for White Stadium were included in this year's budget. There are targeted maintenance and repair work that's been done, and also some management, which includes coordination and collaboration with our various stakeholders and partners. And we're excited to keep these items moving and get more of them underway in the short term. We also wanted to talk about another item on the management side that we've heard a lot of community support for on the topic of equitable investment through the implementation of the action plan recommendations. We have two updates that have a really positive impact on this goal. And the first is regarding the workforce development opportunity through Power Core program that Liza mentioned. This new city program, which is expected to launch this spring, is workforce development initiative to expand access to green jobs through paid training and also hands-on work. It's going to focus mainly on tree care, urban wilds management, and park rangers work. The other initiative is related to equitable procurement of contracted work. The city's Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion is focused on economic equity through a number of programs and initiatives, including those that are dedicated to bringing more contracts to local minority and women-owned businesses. Boston Parks will be able to support these policies and programs through our contracted work at Franklin Park, just as we did with the pilot equitable procurement project we undertook this past year. We're excited to be able to further the goal of ensuring that the surrounding community is impacted in a positive way by the investments in Franklin Park. So where are we now? We've spent the earlier phases of the project understanding the park and developing recommendations with the design team, guided by a series of conversations and surveys with the community and the park users and neighbors. As we transition into talking about community priorities for implementation, we want to spend some time reminding you what the recommendations are and sharing the priorities that have risen to the top so far. Our team has been developing project costs along the way, and we'll share some examples with you today. But in this phase of the action plan, we would like to focus on your priorities for investment so that we can move into that next step of securing the appropriate funding streams that we're targeting, so that we're targeting what's most important to you all first. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bree from Agency Landscape and Planning, and she'll talk more about how engagement is informing these last few phases of the plan.
Thank you, Lauren. And hi, everyone. Good evening. Really good to be here with you. As Lauren said, I'm Bree Hensold with Agency Landscape and Planning, and we are a part of the design team led by Reed Hildebrand, also with representatives from Mass Design Group here tonight. Thousands of voices continue to contribute to the action plan, and you've really helped us to understand what you love, what needs improvement, and where the key opportunities lie. We've heard all of that through community workshops, surveys, and then continued meetings with groups around the park over the last summer and fall. We've learned a lot from those meetings, which has driven the development of the plan recommendations you'll see and talk about tonight. Your feedback also informed the creation of the action plan's 4 big ideas, which structure the design recommendations for the park. And you see those on the screen now. We've used this framework to ensure that all of the projects you see today incorporate your vision for the future of Franklin Park, to amplify magnets with programs and improvements that accommodate your needs, to clarify how you move through the park, to activate the park's edges, and to increase access and better connect the park to the communities that surround it. Underlying all of these ideas is the need to unify the park's landscape, to make it a stronger and more resilient natural resource, recreational destination, and a place for the community to come together. Out of the feedback from workshop number 3, the design survey, and recent city-led conversations, we've learned that your top priority for the action plan is really to incorporate basic needs in the park, like restrooms, lighting, water fountains, and directional and informational signs. Investments in the Elma Lewis Playhouse, the reestablishment of Circuit Loop as a safe and continuous bike and pedestrian loop throughout the park, and management of the park's diverse landscapes and ecologies were also top priorities. And we heard a lot about that already in our lunchtime conversation. As Liza mentioned earlier, we know that park maintenance is on everyone's minds. Any new project in the park must and will plan ahead for how it will be maintained once it's built. But there's also existing maintenance priorities that will need to be addressed sooner and through increased staffing capacity. So these immediate needs have been highlighted further through the Franklin Park Coalition's recent maintenance survey. You can see those results summarized and kind of highlighted here on the screen. As you can see, there's some items that have been identified that will be easier to tackle immediately, and then others that will take additional coordination and planning, but can still be reached within the short term. The overarching priorities we've heard from the community so far really fall into 3 primary project types. Maintenance projects, which include many of the projects shared by the Franklin Park Coalition on the previous slide. Those are more immediate in nature and will be focused on specific issues facing the park and its users. Ecological restoration projects include things like invasive plant removal, and they'll require a strategic and sustained plan for longer term investment. And then there's capital projects, more typical park improvements that are discrete, one-time projects like restoring the Overlook ruins. And when completed, those projects will have an immediate positive impact on the park and its users. So today we'll be focusing mainly on projects within the ecological restoration and the capital projects categories. We've shared a little bit about funding sources earlier, and funding to support these projects is a big part of implementation. As you can see here, there's a wide range of costs associated with the many different action plan recommendations. There are small and large capital improvements, like a nature playscape or the Elma Lewis Playhouse at the Overlook. You can see kind of the two scales of investment there. Ecological restoration of the wilderness, which would, instead of a one-time investment, be a multi-year investment and restoration process that will then be guided by more comprehensive parks, a more comprehensive park woodlands management plan, and then general maintenance efforts, which will grow over time. And the rate of that growth will be somewhat dependent on capital improvements made in the park over time that require more maintenance. So we're providing these examples of costs here, not because we want to focus on them, but just to give a sense of what might be expected. We don't want to focus on the individual price tag of every recommendation that we'll review today. Instead, we want to understand your top priorities in general, so the city can focus their efforts in the near term to secure the appropriate funding for the projects that you want to see happen first. And no matter the project type or cost, there's a lot of additional factors that will have to be considered as any project moves into implementation. Projects will range in size and location throughout the park. Some projects will have varying timelines, and many of the projects will require multiple funding sources to implement and maintain for years to come. We also have to think about permitting and logistics, and often coordinate or collaborate with other city agencies or stakeholders. Franklin Park is a designated Boston landmark, and so most improvements will have to undergo the Commission's review for approval. And there are priorities around bringing a positive impact to the park's ecology and surrounding communities that will be factored into a variety of the different projects. So we've given you a kind of a sense of how things get done. And now I'll pass it to Kristen Fredrickson and Lydia Cook from Reed Hildebrand, who will take us tonight on a virtual walk around the park to remind everyone of the plan's top list of projects.
Thanks, Bree. I'm Kristen Fredrickson. I'm a landscape architect with Reed Hildebrand and a member of the design team. So as Bree said, we'll take a quick virtual walk around the park to remind you of the action plan's proposals To facilitate conversation, we've broken the park into 4 zones: the Playstead and Long Crouch Woods, Peabody Circle and the American Legion Edge, Ellicott Dale in the Wilderness, and Circuit Drive and Circuit Loop. For each of these zones, we'll show you an overview plan that identifies the recommended improvements at a high level. We'll also describe a feature project in a bit more detail. Each feature project represents your feedback on priority investments from Workshop 3 and continued conversations that happened over last summer. Our breakout room discussions will also be organized by these 4 zones. You can choose which area you'd like to join first, and will also be able to move between rooms to join different conversations. Did we skip one, Lydia? Thank you. Before we dig into the individual projects, we want to take a moment to highlight key design components that are part of the thinking behind any capital improvement in the park. Things like signage, furnishing, lighting, pathways, drainage, and planting are fundamental components that improve access, safety, ecological function, and comfort for everyone who visits Franklin Park. Please know that even if they are not highlighted in our review today, these essential elements are part of the plan's proposals. Now let's take a virtual walk around, starting with the Playstead and Long Crouch Woods. As you may remember from our last workshop, the vision for the Playstead is to renew this well-loved space to work better for all of its many different uses: sports, spectating, tailgating, education, large events, and more. Next. Maybe a delay. Thanks. Projects include better integrating White Stadium by opening up access for shared use for Boston Public Schools and the community, upgrading the athletic fields with improved soils, drainage, and stormwater management to increase their durability, and the creation of a planted embankment that brings you up to the tailgate edge, a shaded space for barbecuing, watching sports, and gathering with friends and family. We are proposing a permanent home for the beloved Elma Lewis Playhouse in its historic location at the Overlook. The new stage and seating for outdoor performances would be supported by a pavilion building with restrooms, vending space, and storage. This work would respect the historic nature of the site by restoring and stabilizing the original masonry walls, steps, and furnishings. Removal of overgrown vegetation and invasive plants will improve views and connection to the fields below. All of these improvements are linked via a continuous Playstead loop, a 1-mile bike and pedestrian path supported by lighting, seating, and tree planting. There's even a potential for a dog park on the loop. In Long Crouch Woods, an improved path network weaves through a series of outdoor rooms and a new nature play areas geared toward a range of ages. Reimagined bear dens are restored to preserve the unique historic elements that characterize this park feature while integrating new uses like splash pads and flexible areas for community programming and events. As with much of the park's woodlands, enjoyment of Long Crouch Woods must be supported by investing in the health of this landscape, including managing invasives and regenerating the forest canopy. Now let's move to Peabody Circle, the American Legion Edge, and Scarborough Pond. Peabody Circle, which is the park's main entrance, is transformed from a place for cars to the neighborhood's front porch and a true gateway to Franklin Park and the zoo. We love the idea that a place which is car-oriented today could become a welcoming entrance into the park that opens onto Blue Hill Avenue. An outdoor amphitheater shaded by new canopy trees serves multiple purposes: an education space shared with the zoo, an area for gathering and events, or a shady space to eat lunch on a weekday. At the center of it all, the historic circle is represented in paving to create a flexible plaza that can host markets, food trucks, or small events. This work will require coordination with BTD to clarify and simplify the ways cars circulate through the space today, and with the zoo to support their main entrance and visitors. As we move past Peabody Circle, the circuit loop connects you to several critical forest ecologies: Abbotswood, Rockmorton and Milton, and Scarborough Hill. All need to be reinvigorated with invasive species removal and improved ecological diversity through native planting. New and improved trails and selective clearing of overgrown vegetation provides views across the park from high points. Care of the park's oldest and largest heritage trees, many of which are located along the existing circuit loop, must also be elevated as a priority to preserve them for years to come. Scarborough Pond's aquatic ecology must be protected from nutrient-rich runoff and supported by additional planting at the water's edge. The maintenance yard is an important anchor on this side of the park, servicing the management and care of all of Boston Parks from this location. Future improvements to the yard are imagined to support both BPRD and community uses within the space, including potential spaces for workforce and volunteer training. And now Lydia will take us through the last two zones of proposed improvements.
Thanks, Kristen. Let's make our way over to Ellicott Dale, also known as the Shattuck Picnic Grounds in the Wilderness. Ellicott Dale is imagined to be a destination for everyday life, from birthday parties or family gatherings to movie nights and more informal games or recreation. Sorry about that. Seems to be a little delay here. Okay. As an everyday destination, an active edge along the parking area in the upper lawn will include a new shade structure and restrooms, as well as expanded tennis courts. As you transition down the slope, the lower lawn is restored as a flexible space to just be, an idea closer to the historic intent and that meets the community's aspirations around what makes Franklin Park unique. Buffer planting at the lawn's edge will increase habitat value and add seasonal layers of vegetation to the park that are missing today. A woodland boardwalk and trails bring people into unique natural areas nearby, and a flowering tree walk leads visitors over to Schoolmaster Hill, where the historic ruins and the pergola are restored. As we transition to the wilderness, we move through a restored Ellicott Arch with new lighting to make this a safe connection in the evenings and early mornings. The wilderness is also one of the primary places that we've heard it's critical to emphasize ecological restoration and management. Invasive species removal is the first step in this process, but it must be supplemented by seeding and planting of native and evergreen species to support habitat diversity. Managing the trail network is also a key factor in controlling the spread of invasive plants. This will require decommissioning redundant paths and clarifying circulation with trail wayfinding. This work should be guided by a woodland management plan and will be a sustained effort over several years to complete. Lastly, let's look at the circuit loop and circuit drive, which is central to how we can think about clarifying movement of any kind. We want to elevate multimodal routes for bikes and pedestrians, connect visitors to major park destinations, improve parking and vehicular and bus circulation, and recommend strategic improvements at the park's entrances to provide ADA access to the park's major loops. A reestablished circuit loop as a pedestrian and bike path is supported by consistent lighting and signage directing visitors to various park destinations along its length. The loop also creates better and more frequent path connections to the wilderness from the south and improves woodland habitat. Cars and buses are still important ways that people access the park today, and we want to better support those modes of travel and improve the character of the park's main road, Circuit Drive, which is reimagined as a parkway supported by canopy, trees, appropriate lighting and signage, safe pedestrian pathways, and drainage solutions that address the flooding issues we see along the length of the road today. The proposals around the circuit loop and circuit drive are complex, but we believe they're worth exploring. The improvements are likely to be considered in phases and must be supported through careful testing and traffic feasibility studies in collaboration with the Boston Transportation Department and other park partners, and they will continue to be informed by ongoing community feedback. Lastly, let's touch on parking at the Sausage Lot, which is along the north side of Circuit Drive between the zoo and the golf course, where canopy trees will also play an important role in embedding improved and expanded parking into the park's landscape. This parking lot will also play a critical role in managing stormwater, in addition to supporting the many visitors who begin their park experience here. Now I'll turn it back over to Liza and Bree, who will get us set up to move into breakout room discussions.
Great. Thanks, Lydia. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us tonight. We know that we're sharing a lot of information and it's a lot to take in, but when we go into the breakout rooms, you'll have drawings in front of you that you can reference and to recollect what you saw. We're excited to hear from you as we move into the breakout sessions, where you'll be joined in each room by members of the design team and Boston Parks. And just as a reminder, this phase of the action plan is focused on prioritization. So what we're interested in hearing are which projects are your top priorities and why, what's really resonating with you. And we also are happy to answer additional questions you might have about the implementation process and what happens next.
Thanks so much, Liza. So before we jump into the breakout rooms, just wanted to share a few ground rules so we can try to keep the conversations positive and productive. We'd love it if you can be as present in the session as you can with your videos on, if you feel comfortable with that tonight. This is a space for respectful conversations, so we welcome disagreement with the ideas we've shared or with what you're hearing from your neighbors, but just remember everyone's ideas are welcome, and please stay focused on the topics tonight and build on what others have said. And please remember to share the mic and give everyone who wishes a chance to speak and the opportunity to contribute. Okay, we're going to get going. So you should see a pop-up window soon from which you'll be able to select which room you would like to visit, which each room corresponds to one of those 4 zones around the park. You can either click to enter the room or leave the pop-up window alone, and it will take you to a discussion room automatically. If you'd like to visit multiple rooms over the 40 minutes we're together, we'd welcome that, and you can choose to move around at any time 2 different ways. The first is to click breakout rooms in your Zoom meeting toolbar, which is at the bottom of your screen. And this will re-display the list of breakout rooms that you can choose to join. You'll click the breakout room you wish to participate in and then click join. You can also click leave room to return to the main session, and you'll work with Christine to move to another breakout room. If you'd like to visit all 4 zones, just plan on moving about every 10 minutes or even a little quicker to fit it all in. We'll notify the breakout rooms every 10 minutes as a reminder to those who want to keep moving. So when we come back together, there'll be a chance to share summaries and hear what was discussed in the other rooms. Let's head out and see you in about 40 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Who would like to start?
You should go to a breakout room. And so that way you can
I missed the
participate.
instruction on how to get to a breakout room.
Yeah, but if
I
you
thought this was a breakout room.
no, you have to choose one, or if you need help, I can help you get into one.
How does one choose a breakout room?
If you go down to the bottom of your screen, it might say more, and then you click on that, and then it shows breakout rooms, or it should already be up on the bottom of your screen, the toolbar. But I can also assign you one
there
if
we
you
go.
want.
Yeah, okay.
You can't
Thank
find
you.
it.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay, thanks.
Do you need assistance also?
I see the groups now, but I'm not sure what they mean.
So each one are about
different
different.
region,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Sector of the
Mhm.
park.
Correct.
I just don't know which one is the one closest to me.
Well, you can always move around them. You don't have to stay in it. So you can always
Okay.
jump out back and forth to whichever one you want.
Thank you.
No problem. Carol, Blair, and Michelle, do you guys need help?
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I think we're all reconvened here. We want to just take a moment. I know we're heading into the end of our evening together, so just want to take a moment to give the facilitators a chance to share what we all heard in our rooms, so you can kind of hear the other conversations. And we'll start that out with the Circuit Drive team and John Kett. Oops, John, you're muted, I think. I know.
Oh, automatically muted coming in. That's weird. Okay. Another great conversation on the Circuit Drive group, a little bit different than this morning, but some consistencies. I think, what's starting to be clear on the Circuit Drive conversation is it really needs this next step of study to understand just what all of the implications are around it. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for the positive benefits of it, and there are a lot of questions and hesitations to make sure that we don't make something more challenging than it is right now, and that we're not just thinking about safety on Circuit Drive today, but safety as reconfigured roads move out of the park. So I think it was a really good conversation and a lot to take away from it.
Excellent. Excited to see all the notes and all the chats. We're going to head over to the Plaisted. Who's representing the Plaisted? Is that Mayra?
I can represent it, Bree.
Great.
It's Rhiannon. So equally great conversation in the Plaisted. It started off quite similar to the conversation we had this afternoon, which means we chatted a lot about the dog park and how the dog park could shape up, as well as, both enthusiasm for the dog park and concerns about whether or not that will alleviate some of the etiquette challenges that are happening with dog owners in the park. We also talked about a need. We really shifted pretty quickly into a conversation about how the park will be maintained over the long term, and a conversation about how we will treat all spaces, all fields and courts as equally important. It sounds like we heard a lot about how the basketball courts are treated now, or the tennis courts, and so there's an opportunity for this plan to rethink about that. And then the last point that I'll make is a conversation that we dug into around the Playhouse. There were a couple of thoughts about being engaged more in the design of the Playhouse and the need for community members and the Franklin Park Coalition to play a role in the kind of continued development of those design decisions.
Excellent. Thanks, Rhiannon. How about Kristen from Ellicott Dale?
We also had a really great and interesting, wide-ranging conversation. There was a lot of enthusiasm for the changes at Ellicott Dale, and maybe also some question of whether, even if enthusiastic about whether it rose to the status of a priority relative to some of the other things that might happen. Interest around specific changes at entrances, in particular William Street, and maybe that related more to how some of these small changes that people have been asking for a long time could be early wins and make a big difference in the park, making sure that kind of small early changes are focused on, as well as some of the larger projects. Interest in making sure that any kind of lighting changes are dark sky compliant. Enthusiasm for the changes in the wilderness and questions about the timing for when a management plan might happen and next steps on that project. And I guess those are maybe the high points, but there was a lot of really great conversation, great thoughts. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kristen. Okay, finally, Peabody in the Yard, Lydia.
Great. Yes, we also had a nice conversation and relatively small group, so we were able to dig into the details on a particular set of topics. And we started with talking about the invasive removal process and what crossover opportunities there were with the disc golf community and the enthusiasm there around stewardship for the park and the love for spending time in those areas of the park, and how those two things may have opportunities to come together and be thought of as cohabitating for benefit for everyone, which also led us into a conversation around just safety in the parks, woodlands, and trails, and what recommendations are being made that kind of support those goals so that more people feel comfortable in those spaces. And then we also touched on Peabody Circle a little bit, which also had a lot of support for the proposals there. People interested in not just the benefits for the pedestrians, but also as bikers entering the park, and excited about how those improvements would then connect to the opportunities along a new circuit loop and a full pedestrian loop in the park. And we also touched on the opportunities for new events that come out of that space and those improvements, and also in the other parts of the park as well. And then we kind of circled back to the ecological conversation in the end, and touched on the opportunities for carbon sequestration, and talked about urban canopy and the role of the park's woodlands, not just within the park, but within the larger context of the city. And then we also spent a bit of time talking about the Morton Street edge and how better access could be integrated along that edge, and also touched on the Shattuck and what has been going on with their ongoing planning and the opportunities for crossover access, and making that space really feel welcomed as part of the park today. So great conversation.
Thanks, Lydia. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Lauren. And before I do that, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for coming tonight and sharing your ideas and your continued participation throughout the whole process. Your input has really provided the foundation of a set of really exciting ideas for the park. And I think you've given us tonight a sense of some priorities, but also some concerns to continue to explore as implementation happens. And so that'll be a big part of the next steps. Is to test all of that out and continue to get engagement. And now I'll hand it over to Lauren for some information on how to wrap up.
Muted, sorry. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. One of the things that, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, one of the things that, knowing that all the discussions that we've had, we know that, oh, actually it's the one before this one, I think. We know that you're all very interested in open space and the environment. There it is, thank you. And so we want to make sure that you guys are aware that Boston Parks is updating our open space and recreation plan. And we're conducting a brief survey, which will close on May 31st. And you can access that survey via the website at boston.gov/open-space, or by using the camera on your smartphone to snap the QR code. And that, in addition, on that website is in multiple different languages. So we would love to have you guys help us share that information out as well as take that survey if you haven't done that yet. We also want to remind you that there are several ways to stay engaged or to get involved in the action plan process. First, if you missed the catch-up meeting that Boston Parks hosted on April 28th, you can check out that presentation and the slides with the recording on the project website under the resources tab. You can also view past presentations, including this one, which will be posted by the end of this week. And we're going to drop that link in the chat as well. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the action plan is set to be released by the summer, this summer or fall, with a public comment period this fall. And you can sign up for email updates and to share comments versus the project website, which we've put in the chat a few times, but we'll do that one more time for you guys. The project website will be live through the completion of the action plan project, and then we'll be working to migrate that information back to the City of Boston's website. The contact lists that were generated over the course of the project will also transfer back to the city, and we'll be able to use those for future correspondence that we have for outreach related to Franklin Park and future implementation of these recommendations in that community process. You can always reach out to me directly at lauren.bryant@boston.gov or 617-961-3019. Franklin Park Coalition is also a really great resource. They provide wonderful programming as well as having volunteer opportunities. They're also a great advocate between the community and the Boston Parks Department. You can check out their website at franklinparkcoalition.org. And then a final resource that we wanted to make sure that you all know about is Boston's 311. You can call, use the app, or visit the website, and it's a really great way to let us know about needs in the park. So lastly, thank you guys all again for your time and all of your thoughts and great questions tonight, and for continuing to contribute to this process. So again, thank you all, and we hope you have a wonderful night.